A lot of people have been kind of curious about how I do my reconstructions, so I wanted to make a bit of a video talking about the process that I go through in order to create the hymns that I post. The audio here is probably not going to be great because I just moved into this apartment, I haven't gotten anything set up, and it's a little bad quality audio in here. But I still wanted to make this video because I don't have anything better to do with my time right now. I don't think I really need to use one of my hymns as an example of what I do, but just in case, let's do Isis's hymn, since that's my most popular video that I've ever posted for some reason. I don't do a whole lot of research particularly about Isis, and that's true of most of the deities that I actually have written for. Because the main focus of most of my research is actually the goddess Nut. She's the only one that I've done extensive research for, and you can kind of see a little bit of that in her hymn as well, since I had such a specific image for it. But for example, Isis, what I have to start with when I decide like, oh, I want to write a hymn for this particular god or goddess, you have to research them first. And so you have to get a good idea of who they are, what they represent, what kind of powers they have, the spaces that they occupied in daily life as well as ritual, and just get a cohesive image of who they are. A lot of this includes, for me, looking at epithets that they have. Epithets are basically titles that they're given, so like Lady of Flame, for example, is an epithet. I know that Isis has quite a lot of epithets because she's such a popular goddess, and among them I know there's, for example, Great of Magic, Mother of the Gods, or Isis the Great One in the beginning. I think I included that in my hymn for her. And so that's something that I draw a lot of inspiration from, is their epithets, and I try to include some of them into the hymns that I write. I'm not really successful with all of the hymns that I've written, of including epithets of the particular deity, but I do try to do that. And after I have a good idea of who this deity is and the parts of life that they occupy, I have to write the hymn in English. Sometimes this is done by my friend Ali Stranad. For example, the hymns to Satet and Anoket were both written by him, and they were composed mainly of epithets and historically attested verses in hymns for those two goddesses. For me, I don't work super historically. I do look at hymns that were written for the ancient deity. For example, the hymn to Hapi is pretty heavily based off of a historical hymn to Hapi, but it is technically something that I wrote and that I composed. But you'll see a lot of lines that are similar to what you'll find in the temples. Writing the hymn in English is actually quite difficult because I want to encompass as many aspects of a deity as I can, as well as expressing love, and doing it in a fashion that will be somewhat easy to translate into ancient Egyptian, since ancient Egyptian has a lot of different ways of speaking. It has, different turns of phrases, for example. So anyway, I try to use Middle Egyptian or Ancient Egyptian idioms and turns of speech and things like that, and so that it's a little easier for Alistranad to translate. I'm not always successful with that either, because sometimes it's more important to me to be able to express through the lyrics a form of love or devotion that I think would have been present in the hymns in ancient times as well. But after writing it in English, I have to send it to Alistranad so that he can translate it. We really don't work on a specific timeline because this is just a project that is, well, kind of for fun, and basically we just don't want to put any time constraints like, oh, we have to finish this within a week. We don't want to do that. So he just finishes it in his free time, and then when he gets back to me, he gives me the transliteration, which is the kind of Egyptological convention of how the Egyptians might have pronounced it, and he gives me the hieroglyphic version as well. And then from there, the hard part for me actually begins, because I have to try and reconstruct the vowels as well as the consonants, because the consonants are not actually as firm as people think they are. And so this process is probably the one that is most difficult and the one that is most contested, and I have gotten some comments from not a lot, but a few comments definitely about people who are, from people who are mad at me, basically. I'm not saying that my reconstruction of this language is completely 100% accurate. I doubt it's even 90% accurate or 80% accurate because it's really, really hard to know. The main reason that it's so hard to reconstruct ancient Egyptian, as you might know, is that the ancient Egyptian language did not preserve any vowels, which is an issue because then you come across words that are purely consonants and you have no idea how to pronounce NTK. Netek, nitek, natak, noltek, you know? There are a lot of different variations of how you can pronounce this pretty simple word. And so when you have a language that doesn't preserve its vowels, you have to look elsewhere for evidence of what those vowels might have been. And fortunately, ancient Egyptian did evolve into a language. Well, it's basically the last stage of the language, which is Coptic. And Coptic does have vowels because it uses a partially Greek alphabet. And because of the presence of Coptic, we are able to see remnants of ancient Egyptian words that are now in Coptic that have their vowels preserved. And I talked about that a tiny bit in my video about Ma'at. I showed that there was a remnant of the word Ma'at in Coptic, and that's kind of part of how we know how that was pronounced. But at the same time, language evolves over thousands of years. And again, the ancient Egyptian language was spoken for a very long time, like thousands of years. And so because of that, well, think about English, for example. You wouldn't be able to understand Old English. You might be able to understand Middle English, but not Old English because it's so vastly different. And the same is kind of true of ancient Egyptian. And we're specifically looking at Middle Egyptian, which was likely an invention, I believe, of Upper Egypt, whereas Old Egyptian was an invention of Lower Egypt. And then Late Egyptian was likely Lower Egyptians coming back and their language taking precedent again. And it's not to say that these are two separate languages. It's more to say that these are dialects that then became very popular across Egypt. So anyway, besides Coptic remnants, you can also look at languages that are related to ancient Egyptian. So ancient Egyptian is part of the Afro-Semitic language family, also called Afro-Asiatic, and a couple other different things as well, but I usually just say Afro-Semitic. So it's related to languages like Assyrian, Amadic, Tamashek, Beja, languages like that are spoken in kind of like North Africa as well as the Middle East, or was anyway. There are some words that are kind of related to one another, and you can see them. For example, you have the word ana, which means, I think, I in Arabic, and you can kind of see that being related in the ancient Egyptian language as well, because you see it in Assyrian as well. So the similarity of ana goes back to Old Egyptian, where you have the first person singular I-N-K, but again, we don't really know the vowels, so you could reconstruct it as anak. And then, for example, this first person singular in Akkadian is anaku, which is the Semitic language. And then in Tamashek, which is an Amazigh language, you have the first person singular, which is naku, or just Nuk. And so there is that pretty clear similarity between those languages. And this is just one example, of course, and it's just the easiest example that I could pull out of my head. There are a lot of other similarities that connect Egyptian as an Afro-Semitic language to other languages, but it's not primarily what I use to reconstruct because it's very difficult to try and go through the dictionaries of so many different languages just to try and find what might be maybe connected by some vague meaning. It's very difficult. I mean, I do have a lot of those dictionaries saved, fortunately, but I don't often find similarities. They're pretty hard for me to find. So for the majority of the reconstructions, when I look at a possible reconstruction of a word, I usually just go straight to the Coptic dictionary because that's gonna obviously be what's most obvious. And I also look at what other linguistic scholars have to say because sometimes people who study ancient Egyptian, they reconstruct a word based on their knowledge, and their knowledge is a lot more extensive than mine, and so I usually go off of what they're saying. Another issue that I have with reconstructing is the fact that there were different dialects. And so you have an Upper Egyptian dialect, you have a Lower Egyptian dialect, and you have a lot of other different dialects as well that we kind of know about hypothetically, but don't know too much about in the terms of actual evidence, because it's very hard to find linguistic evidence, especially in a language, again, that did not preserve its vowels and was not open to the majority of the people, instead being preserved only for a very high-ranking class. But there are a lot of times that, especially with smaller words, that there is no Coptic remnants, there's nothing I can find from other scholars, and there's no connection to other words in the Afro-Semitic language family. And so when that happens, because obviously that is going to happen, and I want to be clear that, again, my reconstructions are not going to be like 100% accurate. I kind of have to just guess based on the consonant vowel structure of other words. And so you'll often see that a lot of words with 3 consonants have the 2 vowels in between them, A and I. When I reconstruct NTK, I usually say natik, and I usually put the emphasis on the first vowel. So that's the hardest part of constructing these hymns, is reconstructing the pronunciations of Middle Egyptian. As I've noted in a comment before, I do use a couple papers from Kammerzahl and Seltzinger, because they have some pretty good papers explaining not only vowels, but also the changes in consonants, because there are a couple consonants that we're really not sure about. The biggest one is the glottal stop, I think, because there are a lot of different ways that we think it might have been pronounced, and again, it changed over time. It probably changed over location, just like myths and things like that. The pronunciation of words would have been different. Even if you go to Egypt today, Upper Egyptians have a kind of different dialect than people who live in Lower Egypt, aka Cairo versus Aswan. So I kind of generally try to stick with the Lower Egyptian dialect, but again, that's not super possible because we already have trouble reconstructing the language in general. It's just going to make my job a lot harder to try and differentiate between dialects. I try my best, and I definitely depend very heavily on the scholars who have put a lot of work into deciphering what ancient Egyptian might have sounded like in the process of the language from pre-dynastic times up into Coptic. After reconstructing, of course, my job isn't done because I have to create a melody. And this is also quite difficult because I want to create a melody that is not Oriental, but still sounds like it might have been played in ancient Egypt. And when I say Oriental, I mean the West's idea of what Oriental music should sound like, which is completely inaccurate. It often combines instruments that weren't available in the same areas and different styles that didn't mesh at all realistically in the past. And so I try to stay away from over-Orientalizing my music, but it is very difficult because I haven't been trained in Middle Eastern music styles or anything like that. I did live there for a while, but that doesn't mean that I was particularly paying attention to the different types of music that are played in terms of how to replicate them myself. And so not only do I have to try and make sure that it sounds kind of vaguely ancient Egyptian, or at least just that it doesn't sound Western and modern, I have to also make sure that it matches the personality of the deity. Because if I have a very mellow deity who is, more about love and marriage and family protection, I don't want to give it a warlike tune. Or if I have a warlike deity, I don't want to make it a lullaby, The melodies, for example, of Nut's hymn and the melody of, for example, Ptah's hymn, they're not interchangeable at all. They don't fit each other if I switched them. And so I have to keep both of these things in mind as I am trying to come up with a melody. Unfortunately, I don't have any ancient Egyptian instruments because that would be incredibly difficult to curate. And so I do just have a guitar, which is, of course, a more Western instrument. But I do my best with it. I do try. And I have my voice, which is universal, basically. And I have a sistrum that I actually got at the Temple of Dendera, so that is also really nice to have, of course. Besides that, I do have drums in my songs, but I don't actually have a drum. The drums in my songs is... it's me playing on the back of my guitar and hitting my microphone. So I try my best with what I have, and I try to create a melody, a tune that is attuned to the personality of the deity and the setting, the historical setting of ancient Egypt. I record all of this in my bedroom, or whatever room is available to me at the time, and so I don't have a professional recording studio or anything like that. Sometimes sound slips through, and this is the microphone that I use to record. It's not the best microphone in the world, but it works most of the time. Sometimes it picks up a little too much static, but that's okay. I do my best to edit it out, and sometimes I just have to re-record, which is, it's whatever. Finally, when the hymn is finished recording, I have to make the video. So obviously it takes a little bit of effort to edit together the videos. So I take Ali Stranad's transliteration and his hieroglyphics text, and I edit them together to be one image, and then I put that into my iMovie thing, and I give it captions so that it has my reconstruction and the English translation, so that it has everything available all in one place. That is kind of time consuming, of course, but I think it's worth it so that it's all just very cohesive. And then, of course, there is the matter of finding specific images of a deity to add into the spaces where I'm not singing, so you don't have any lyrics to look at. And that can be difficult sometimes, because there are definitely deities that are very much like lesser known, and there's just very, very few images of them on the internet. There are a few depictions of them in temples, and those few depictions scarcely make their way onto the available internet. So, for example, Satet's hymn was incredibly hard to find photos for. You'll see in the beginning, I literally just have an image of something. I actually think I took that photo, I don't remember, but it's just scanning down a hieroglyphic text that has Satet's name in it from her temple on Elephantine. And then after that, there's only one photo of her, which I also use as the thumbnail for the video, but the thumbnail's just edited because I had to draw in a little outline to make it more clear who the hymn is for. Other deities are a little easier to find images for. I was very fortunate with Horus's hymn that we have a friend who made these absolutely excellent illustrations that meshed super well with the song, and so I'm very happy about that. But it can be quite difficult to try and find images that are suiting, that are beautiful, because I don't want to use images of statues that look kind of weird or just have strange expressions, because it kind of detracts from the experience, I feel. So I want to find not only just images but high quality ones that have good expressions and are well illustrated and well done. And for example, Nut's hymn, I have some illustrations I write at the end because I was struggling to find actual images of her from like ancient times, basically like carvings or walls depicting her and things like that. And so I included some illustrations, one by me, and then I had an illustration by the artist Milky Rosen, and then I also had my favorite illustration of Nut right at the end, and that's going to be the same for Nefertum's hymn, where I have my favorite illustration of him at the end of the video, kind of to tie everything together. But finally, after that, the video is done, the hymn is finished, and yeah, I move on to the next one. I don't really know how we choose which god or goddess to do next. It just kind of comes. Sometimes I want to do something where it's like, oh, well, more people are interested in this deity, so I'll do that one. And other times it'll be more like, I'm more interested in this deity, so I want to do this one. Or it'll be, Ali Stranad is more interested in this deity, so we'll do this one right now. But yeah, that's my process of creating the hymns. If you want to know a little bit more about the way I reconstruct and the connection of ancient Egyptian to Afro-Semitic, then I can do a bit of a video on that. I kind of figured that it's a very complex subject though, so I don't really want to get into it in a video where I'm talking about everything else as well. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it cleared a few things up. And again, do let me know if you want to have a bit more of a deep dive into the actual process of linguistics and phonetics and reconstructing ancient Egyptian. So thank you for watching, and thank you for listening to our hymns.